Somebody in your group is getting pleased with himself. He is the best hunter you have. Everybody knows it, and lately he has started to act like it. So here's the question. What do you do about him? The modern answer is that you do not do anything. He is good, so he rises. That is how it works. For most of human history, that was not the answer. The answer was that you humiliate him. Go to the Kalahari, to the Jew hoansi, described by the anthropologist Richard Lee. A man comes back into camp having killed a large animal, a genuinely excellent kill. And what he receives is insults. You call that an animal? We will have to boil the bones for soup. This is common enough to have a name in the literature. Insulting the meat. And Lee did the obvious thing. He asked them why they do it. The answer he got was not shyness, and it was not a joke. When a young man kills much meat, they told him he comes to think of himself as a chief and the rest of us as his servants. So we speak of his meat as worthless. In this way, we cool his heart and make him gentle. Read that again, because it is a stated policy. They know exactly what they are doing, and they know why. And it is one tool out of several. There is ridicule and gossip, which is relentless, and simple disobedience, because nobody can make you do anything. There is desertion, which we will come back to, because it turns out to be the important one. And in the last resort, there is killing him quietly by group agreement. Christopher Bohm went through the ethnographic record and collected these cases, and he gave the pattern a name. The reverse dominance hierarchy. And to see why that phrase is doing real work, look at almost any other primate group. In a chimpanzee community, the strongest individual dominates everybody else, and the rest submit. Humans, in small mobile groups, turn that upside down. The rest dominate the strongest one. Not because they are nicer, but because they can coordinate, and no individual beats a coalition of everybody else. Weapons. A thrown spear makes the strongest man in the band killable by the weakest, and once that is true, no amount of muscle keeps you on top. So the equality here is not a mood. It is enforced continuously by people who are paying attention. And it is expensive. It costs vigilance and constant social work, and nobody pays that price for preference. They pay it for a danger. Now an important correction before this turns into a story about noble simplicity. It is not true that hunter-gatherers are all egalitarian. On the northwest coast of North America, there were peoples with hereditary nobles, commoners, and slaves, and no farming at all. So the rule is not farming makes hierarchy. The rule is closer to this. Hierarchy needs two things: something worth having that can be kept, and people who cannot walk away. And it is worth sitting on that second one, because it is the whole hinge of this episode. In a mobile band, the final check on a bully is that people simply leave. You go and stay with cousins in the next valley, because your possessions fit on your back. A leader nobody obeys, and everybody leaves is not a leader. He's a man standing in a field. Fission is the veto. It is the oldest political instrument we have, and almost everything that follows is the story of that exit closing. So what does leadership look like while the exit is still open? Not like a boss. In 1963, Marshall Solins wrote a paper comparing Melanesia and Polynesia. And the figure he describes for Melanesia is the big man. The first thing to understand about a big man is that there is no such office, no title, no chair, and nobody hands it to him. He has influence, and influence has to be bought continuously, and it is bought in one currency: generosity. He works harder than anybody else in the village. He grows more yams than he needs, raises more pigs than he needs, and calls in every favor he is owed. And then he gives all of it away at one enormous public feast. And while everybody eats, everybody is also counting. Because a gift is a debt. That is not cynicism. It is how the system is built, and obligation is the only asset he owns. Which is a terrible asset to own, because it evaporates. Stop giving, and it is gone within a season. His followers can quietly attach themselves to a rival big man whenever they like, and there is nothing he can do. And he cannot pass any of it to his son, which is the fact that matters most here. A big man's power dies when he does. Every single generation has to start again from nothing. Which is why the ethnographies describe big men as exhausted, and their households as resentful. His wives and his brothers are the ones actually growing the yams that he gives away. It is the most demanding job in the society, and what it buys is one lifetime of respect. Now here is the line that actually matters, and it is not the one people usually point at. The threshold is not somebody being in charge. Somebody is always more or less in charge. The threshold is when the position outlives the person holding it. When there is a chair, and the chair is still there after he dies, and somebody else sits in it. That is an office. And the thing about an office is that it can be inherited. Now, can you see in the ground? Sometimes, and here's what to look for. Look at the graves. In a society where standing is earned, the rich graves belong to adults because earning takes time. So the signature everybody looks for is a rich child burial. A 5-year-old buried with more wealth than any adult in the cemetery. A child has not hunted anything, led anything, or given a feast. The wealth arrived with the birth, and that is what anthropologists call ascribed status. At Varna, on the Black Sea, around 4600 BC, one grave holds more worked gold than had been found in the entire rest of the world for that date, and the graves around it are wildly unequal. Some have everything, most have nothing. But now the complication, because this is not a tidy story. At Sungur in Russia, around 34,000 years ago, 2 children were buried with roughly 10,000 mammoth ivory beads. Every bead had to be carved, and the estimates for the labor run into thousands of hours. Some read it as inherited status. Others read it as grief. Nobody knows, and anybody who tells you they do is skipping a step. Then look at houses. When one house is much larger, better built, and holds the imported things, that is a signal. Then look at storage. When storage stops being a pit in every house and becomes one central building, somebody is now in charge of the food. And then look for what is absent, which is harder and more interesting. We ran into it in the episode on houses. At Çatalhöyük, in Anatolia, nothing reads as a chief. No palace, no obvious plan, no central granari. Houses are all roughly the same size, and each one stores its own food. Thousands of people, for well over 1,000 years, with no visible boss anywhere in the excavation. That is not a gap in the evidence. That is a finding, and it is a hard one to explain if hierarchy is what happens automatically when people crowd together. So what actually breaks the machine? The usual answer is agriculture, and it is nearly right, but for the wrong reason. Farming matters because of what it produces, which is a stock. A stock can be stored, which means it can be counted, defended, hoarded, and taken. Meat cannot. Meat rots in a day or two in the heat, which is exactly why sharing meat is close to universal among foragers. But you can hoard grain, and grain will sit in a jar for years. So for the first time, one household can visibly have more than a household next door, and keep having it. And once there's a store worth raiding, and defending it needs organizing, and organizing is a job somebody holds. And at the same time, the other half of the hinge closes. You cannot leave. A field is an investment you cannot carry. Cleared land, terraces, canals, orchards, granaries, all of it fixed in place, and all of it last year's work. And the moment leaving becomes expensive, the coalition loses its best weapon. You can still mock him. You can still refuse. You simply cannot go. Which is why it is worth noticing where the earliest states show up. Floodplains, grain, lots of it. And James Scott made an argument about this that is hard to unhear. It is not only that grain grows well there. It is that grain is legible. It stands above the ground, it ripens all at once, and it can be measured, valued, and carried off in a cart. The crop that makes you rulable is the one that can be counted while it stands in the field. Now, the part that almost everybody has backwards, and it is my favorite thing in the subject. Athens, democracy, and the method was not voting. Most Athenian offices were filled by lot, drawn at random from the citizens who put their names forward. Hundreds of officials a year, chosen the way you would draw a raffle. There was a machine for it, in stone. The clariterion, a slab cut with columns of slots, with tokens and a tube of black and white balls. Juries of several hundred people were assembled the same morning, by lot, so that nobody could be bribed in advance. And elections, where they still used them, were understood to be the aristocratic method. Aristotle says it in one line. Appointment by lot is democratic. Election is oligarchic. Which is the exact reverse of how we talk about it now. And his reasoning is not mysterious once you look at it. An election selects for the qualities that win elections. Wealth, family name, connections, a good speaking voice. A lottery cannot be bought, cannot be inherited, and cannot be turned into a faction, because nobody chose you and you owe nobody anything. And the man holding office knows he will be an ordinary citizen again next year, standing in the assembly being shouted at. That is the reverse dominance hierarchy rebuilt deliberately in law by a society far too large to walk out of. And there was one more instrument, and it is the strangest one: ostracism. Once a year, the assembly asked the question, is anybody getting too large? If enough citizens wrote a name on a piece of broken pot, that man left the city for 10 years. He kept his property, his family stayed, and there was no charge, no crime, and no trial because he had not done anything. It was not a punishment. It was pruning. You were not exiled for what you did. You were exiled for how large you had become, which is insulting the meat, written into a constitution. Same problem, recognized in the same terms, answered with the same instinct. Now the honest part, because the version of this story I was taught is being dismantled. For decades, the standard model was a ladder: band, then tribe, then chiefdom, then state, in that order, one way only. Almost nobody defends that now in its strong form. David Graeber and David Wengrow pushed hardest, arguing that people moved between arrangements, and some did it seasonally, concentrating for a part of the year under something like a chief and dispersing into equals for the rest of it, which would make hierarchy something closer to a costume, put on for the season and taken off again. That reading is genuinely contested, and specialists have pushed back hard on parts of it, so do not take it as settled. But the direction it pushes is right, and it is the direction this whole episode has been going. None of this happened to people. People could see what was happening, and they had opinions about it, and sometimes they acted. So what was lost was not innocence, and it was not simplicity. What was lost was the exit. The oldest political technology we have is not the vote, and it is not the assembly. It is the ability to laugh at a man, refuse him, and walk away. And everything since sortition, term limits, impeachment, a free press, the right to strike, is an attempt to rebuild that one thing for people who can no longer leave.